So we're here today to talk a little bit about lecture, and also I will give a mini lecture during this session. And just to give a little context of the lecture today, as Laura mentioned, my name is Dr. Gerson, and I've been teaching here at U of T for about, I would say, 12, 13 years now, and at New College for the past 10 years. First as a teaching assistant while I was doing my PhD, which I did here at U of T, and now as a professor at New College. Now, I teach world history in the International Foundation program, but I also teach about digital technology and society, and I coordinate the New One program. So my lecture today comes out of discussions we have in the New One program around issues of the relationship between sort of global forces and local issues today. And one of our courses deal with the issue of food. So what we're going to look at today is think about one concept, which is the concept of globalization. And then think about what does that concept mean in the context of the COVID-19 epidemic in the past, almost 2 years now. And to talk about that, then we are going to focus on the issue of food, because it's something that we all can relate to. We all need to eat, right? So those are the things that we're dealing with today. Now, to get going on this topic, we're going to use a couple interactive tools. One is the chat window that I encourage you to find at the minute. Like if it disappeared from you, you can look at the top of your screen and it should be one of the options in the bar on top of the sharing screen. Or if there is a more window, you should probably see it there. So let's find that chat window at the moment. And you can, to see that you found it, you can post quickly on it just where you are at this point, right? So where are you right now? So if you can just type in the chat, where are you? Then we can see that folks have found. Okay, so we have folks from Calgary, Toronto, Whitby, Vancouver, Bradford. It's going really fast. Lima, oh, bienvenido. Toronto, lots of Toronto folks coming in. Namibia, wow, amazing. Mauritius, I have a really good friend from Mauritius. She lives here in Toronto now. Manila, the Philippines, excellent. India, amazing. You folks from the other side of the world, wow, I am very impressed that you're here at this time of the day. What time is it in India right now? I'm not quite sure I know which time zone you're in. Taiwan, ooh, that would be in the middle of the night. In China, excellent. So folks are coming in from everywhere. Okay, good. Now, the other thing that we will be using, and I'll post a link for you in the chat since now you found your way there, is this. So if you can find your way to that site, it won't show you anything yet, but we'll need to use it in a couple instances here today to talk a little bit about not only the topic for the lecture, but also to share how you feel about lectures at university. So if you can click on the link on the chat, it should take you to a page. If the slide disappears, you can make your way back to this slide. But in the link, once I make the poll available, you see this chart here that you see on your screen. So on a scale of cat, how are you doing today? So look at these pictures here. And pick your number before I make the poll available, because I feel with this many people in the meeting, I see we are 56 of us here today. Once I make the poll available, basically you're going to click in one of these numbers And I'm pretty sure very quickly we're going to, the cats are going to disappear. So look at your cat and think about which one do you think you relate to. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I am going to share another screen with you now. Just give me a second. Aha. Hold on. There we go. Here we go. Now you can click in one of the cats, and I can see number 5 is winning at this point, although 6 is coming. Not 9 is the next one down. Oh my God, a lot of people are very tired today. Those are the folks on the other side of the world who are logging in at, I don't know, 1 in the morning. You haven't even gone to bed yet. And I can see sort of in between that and our Mexican cat. Excellent. Very good. So this works. Now let's stay there for a minute while I deactivate this and move us into the next one. I'll just leave it open. Since we're going to talk about lecturing, let's share what you're most worried about attending lectures at U of T. Now, once you start submitting answers, you'll be able to also agree with someone else's answer, okay? So if someone posts a particular answer that you agree with, you can just upvote that one instead of saying the same thing again.
I think we can still only see the slides on your screen right now.
Oh, the slides? Okay, so let me share this again. You should be able to see this.
Yeah, it's perfect. Now we can see it.
Okay, so now you can see the answers as well. All right, a lot of folks worried about note-taking. Prof going too fast. Missing key information. Falling behind in lecture. These are all very common, not only concerns, I would say, but realities, right? I won't lie to you, it will happen. The pace and length of lecture, yeah, you'll be probably dealing with lectures anywhere from 50 minutes to maybe just a little under 2 hours. Those are usually the lengths of classes we have at U of T. Yes, the content, can you absorb all the content? So these are all very valid concerns, and we can see there is a lot more information. We're going to get back to this slide actually at the end of the session to sort of go through some of these options here. Let me just stop this for a minute. Hold on a second. I'll stop sharing with you for a minute, and then I will stop this. But I'm gonna, go back to this screen later on so we can revisit some of these topics. And hopefully we can address some of them. Now today, and I'll share again this particular slide, we will then simulate a lecture here, and then we can talk back about some of these questions you have towards the end, okay? My plan, as I mentioned at the beginning, is deal with this issue of globalization in the age of COVID-19. So what we're going to look at is think about definitions of globalization first. First we need to know what we're talking about. And then we can talk about the impact of COVID-19. So before we get to that, I am curious, and this is when I'm going to ask you once again to go back to our link. And I'm going to activate that. I want you to think about 2 to 3 words that you associate with globalization. Okay, it can be the first things that come into your head. If you can only think of one word, that's fine too. But if you think of more, that's okay. So think about 2 to 3 words that you associate with globalization. And then go back to that poll and submit them one by one, right? So one at a time. Don't write 3 words because then it's not going to break out properly. And I can show you then what is happening with that as soon as I can go into my full screen on the other screen. And then, oops, nope. There we go. Okay, worldwide. Okay, we're talking about something going across the world. A lot of people connecting it to trade, to the concept of being international, right? Multinational. I think multinational corporations or multinational companies here. This system is a little flawed and separate complex words like that. Monoculture. This is an important concept when we're talking about food, and we're going to see that in a minute. Collaboration. So a lot of other terms here that are maybe, were submitted maybe once or twice. Social, I wonder social, what exactly? Let's see if I can, social media perhaps was the term that folks were connecting to. And certainly communications is an element that we can think about as being connected to globalization, right? Now, I'm going to present some definitions then of globalization. You showed me some of the things you connect to globalization. And let's go through some, what we can say, we want to look at some maybe official definitions of it and see how it connects to some of what you had to say. If I start with Wikipedia, okay, I just heard the concept for the first time. I can go online and just check out the Wikipedia entry. When I checked in 2018, the definition that I found on Wikipedia was that globalization was defined as an international integration that has developed from increasing human connections. Then when I checked again after a couple years, in July last year, it gave me the definition of globalization as being a process of interaction and integration among people, companies, and governments worldwide. Here's the word that many of you submitted there. And as a complex and multifaceted phenomenon, globalization is considered by some as a form of capitalist expansion, which entails the integration of local and national economies into a global, unregulated market economy. So it's given us a definition here that focuses on integration among people, companies, and governments, but also focusing on the sort of economic and political side of those connections. Now, just yesterday, the definition that it gave me, it's similar there. You still have that line of the process of interaction and integration among people. But then it gives a little bit of a historical background, as globalization has accelerated since the 18th century due to advances of transportation and communication technology. This has led then to the increase of global interactions, and then focuses on the trade, but then adds in exchange of ideas, beliefs, culture. So we see the definition has changed a little bit in each of the years that we look at Wikipedia. And this is the nature of Wikipedia itself, right? It's always changing. People are adding new information. We don't know who's writing, but it gives us a general sense. Now, if I leave Wikipedia aside and start going through more academic sources, then I start finding other kinds of definitions. So for example, if I look of an article entitled Globalization, written by a team of political scientists and economists back in 1999, they defined globalization as the accumulation of links across the world's major regions and across many domains of activity. So in short, globalization is about the connections between different regions of the world. And it's not focusing on a particular type of connection, right? You say everything from the cultural to the criminal, the financial to the environmental, and the ways in which they change and increase over time. If I look at another source, this is a book written for a more popular audience by a Swedish journalist, in which he defines globalization as the process of world shrinkage, of distances getting shorter, things moving closer. So he's using a metaphor here, right? And it connects to the increasing ease with which somebody on one side of the world can interact to mutual benefit with somebody on the other side of the world. So an example of this is what we're doing right now, right? For some of you who are in India or China, Taiwan, it's a little bit of what he's describing here, right? How easy it is for you to be in your home right now, attending this lecture at the University of Toronto. A history textbook. This is a textbook I use in one of my classes. The authors of this textbook define it in a sort of more long-winded way as this increasingly thick network of connectedness or entanglement, an increase of international trade and investment, the flow of ideas and cultural patterns around the world, the large-scale movements of people, the global spread of diseases. So in other words, there's many different aspects of this globalization, right? Now, you yourself gave a lot of terms that connect to some of these ideas. So I'm going to pause here right now, since we're talking about lecturing at university. And I'm going to ask you here, so I'm stepping out of the lecture a bit, to ask you, why do you think first question is, why do you think I started, instead of going straight into a definition, I ask you first what you think is something that you connect to globalization, presenting sort of your own definition first. What was the point of that poll, you think? Am I just wasting your time? You can type on the chat. Okay, to engage with the listener, to allow the lecture to closely tailor terms and definitions to the audience, to see what we know, opportunity for student engagement. Yes, to all of this, the above in many ways, but also one of the important elements here is, yes, student engagement, very important. But also because one of the real differences you're going to find as you transition from high school to university is that the emphasis in university is not just to receive knowledge, right? So if the important element was to receive knowledge, then all I would do is give you the knowledge here. Let's go straight to a definition of globalization. And here you learn this definition and this is it, right? But this is not the business of the university. The business of the university is for all of us at the university to create knowledge. So you as a scholar, and now you're a scholar by being at the university, you are going to be in the business of creating your own scholarship, which means to create new knowledge. So all the assignments you're going to do, you're going to study and you're going to learn things, but you're often going to be asked to write assignments, write answers that show um, that you you've learned all this knowledge, but can also put it together in a way that you are creating new knowledge yourself. And it may seem a little scary to think about, how can I create knowledge? I'm just starting out. I don't know anything about these topics, right? But this is the process that you're going to get through as you move along. Things are going to become clearer as you move along. But that's definitely an emphasis there. We're not so interested that you can repeat exactly what we're saying in class, but rather that you can absorb that and make it your own. Now, the other element here is that I gave you a lot of different definitions, right? Now, why did I not choose just one definition to give to you? Why do I have to present so many? And if I ask about, globalization in the exam, let's say I ask for definition of globalization, what do? You choose one of these? Do you make it up yourself? Um, what do you think is going on here with all these definitions of globalization? Okay, so I see some suggestions coming in. So we can use the ones you gave us to create our own, show different perspectives, different perceptions. The definitions vary depending on the author's background, politics. So there is no concrete objective definition, multiple perspectives. So it's not that there isn't, a definition. But yes, all of the things that you're going to study, again, connecting to that concept of scholarship, of creating new knowledge. Scholarship, research, is all basically connecting to a conversation about something, right? So scholars that are looking at globalization are all having a debate about globalization. And what they choose to study and what they choose to focus on, the questions they choose to ask, is going to, yes, depend on their background, their interests, where they're coming from. So if you're an economist, you're naturally going to be more interested in the economic effects of globalization. So if you have to define it, you're probably going to come up with a definition that highlights, international trade and multinational corporations and all those, economic side of globalization. If you're a political scientist, you're going to think much more in terms of the political consequences of globalization, right? And that's the, a key thing to keep in mind, is when you read an article, when you read your textbook, that everything that you read and consume is going to have a certain perspective. And it doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, okay, just because it has a certain perspective. It's just that you need to be aware that there is this perspective. Okay, so it's not to say that someone who gives a definition that's more closely focused on just the economic side of globalization doesn't mean that that's wrong. It means that you can talk about it and say, well, but we also need to look at maybe the cultural side or the political side, social side, right? So the key here is not so much you need to come up with your own exclusive definition, but one way to approach it is, for example, in the exam, if you're asked to give a definition, you can start out by saying that there are many definitions of globalization, right? Depending on the perspective or the background of the author. And you can highlight what they have in common, for example. Instead of coming up with something completely different, which may not be based on the reality, right? you can look at all these definitions and think about what are some of the things they have in common. Perhaps what they have in common is that they all focus on this notion of connection, right, across space. Perhaps what they have in common is this connection between the local and the global. And that's how we would start off by then coming up with, maybe your own definition is by looking at all of these and finding what are the elements they have in common. And that way you can translate them into your own words, right? So we can define globalization as this process of transformation of local phenomena. And it can be local economy, local politics, local culture, into global phenomena. So all the elements that we deal with in terms of globalization are elements that started as something local, right? But now we think of as global. McDonald's was one day just one hamburger store in California. So in a way, it was a very local thing. And then it expanded across the country, the United States, eventually to Canada, and eventually to the whole world, to the point now that is not necessarily seen as just an American thing. So this process of local versus global. Now, the other thing that I want to stress here that also gets highlighted in terms of globalization, and many of you mentioned that in your answers that you submitted as well, is that a central player in this process of globalization are multinational corporations, right? Sometimes also called transnational corporations. These are huge global businesses that operate in many countries at the same time. And perhaps each one of these started out, as a small local company, but in the course of the 20th or 21st centuries became global businesses, which no longer are connected to just one place. And since we're going to be talking about food today, this picture here show a little bit of the products that are available in a grocery store, so the average grocery store in North America, is really produced by just a few corporations. I mean, we see many, many brands in a grocery store, but these brands are all owned by these large corporations. So then when we put them all together and figure out which is the corporate owner of that brand, really the whole grocery store then becomes condensed to, fewer than 10 companies. I can zoom some of this. You think of Coca-Cola as a company, and then you think of just Coca-Cola itself, but Coca-Cola now owns hundreds of brands. This chart doesn't give it justice. I give an entire lecture on the history of Coca-Cola, and, yes, starts with one drink, but now they own hundreds of beverage brands, everything from water to energy drinks, to iced teas, to, like, you name it. Coca-Cola has some of those. And these multinational corporations have just, they just continue to grow in size and acquire more businesses, and then become more and more powerful. So as a result, just to give us a sense, this is a list that is created nearly every other year. The latest I found was from 2017, that looks at the top 100 economic units in the world. And this list used to be made of exclusively of countries. And over the last 10, 15 years, we start seeing more and more corporations making to this list, right? So they're comparing the revenues of corporations with the revenues of countries. And by 2017, 71% of this list were corporations. So all the red here were corporations, and the lines in black are countries. In the top 10, we have Walmart as a corporation in that list. So Walmart has a revenue that's larger than the country of Spain, for example, or Australia, or the Netherlands, or South Korea. In other words, there's only 9 countries in the world that has a revenue larger than Walmart. Canada is just like above Walmart in this list. I wonder what it is today, actually, because this list is now 4 years old. And every year that this list was made, there's more and more corporations, and more of them are higher up this list. I suspect that there's more of them in the top 10. Now, I'm mindful of the time, so let's just jump ahead here to think about, okay, this is just, I made a list that's a little bit easier to read, just to give a sense of how many corporations are in the top 30 there. So we can see several corporations here that have a revenue higher than the whole country of India, for example. So for my Indian friends who are in this group, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 corporations with a revenue larger than a country with over 1 billion people. It's crazy to think about it. Now, in terms of globalization and COVID-19, how does COVID-19 impact globalization? Now, this is a very big topic. We don't have time to go over it in detail here today. So I'm just going to focus on the example of food, because that's something that affects us all, right? And especially in the developed world, we take food for granted. We don't really have, most of us, there's food available to us. We don't think of a day where we might go to a grocery store and not find food that we need, right? I mean, of course, there's issues of access in terms of money, not having enough money to buy food. There is poverty everywhere in the world, including in industrialized countries. But we assume that if you have the money, you can find the food. And COVID-19 shook those assumptions a bit and made us realize that we're not as safe in terms of access to food as we thought that we were. And there's teams of researchers looking at this specific question in terms about what are the effects of COVID-19 on the global food system, but also what lessons can we learn from this epidemic now that we are kind of moving, hopefully, out of it. And to examine this question, they look at it in terms of a system. They look at agriculture, the actual growing of the food, the processing of that food, the transportation, and finally, the point of it where we interact with it in terms of consumption. Now, here let's start back. Agriculture, just in general terms, we found that during COVID-19, agriculture was affected in many ways. Farm production was affected because, for example, factories that produced fertilizers and pesticides that were needed to grow the food had closed down in some regions because of COVID-19 outbreaks. So then there were farms that couldn't get the fertilizers and pesticides that they needed. Even when these factors didn't close down, it was hard to get those products that they needed in the farm because there were road closures, there were border closures, there was all kinds of issues that affected transportation of these fertilizers or pesticides. Here in Canada, we rely a lot on migrant farm workers to produce our food. So we import workers from Mexico, from as far away as the Philippines. There is a program by the Canadian government that helps these farm workers from different parts of the world to come to Canada to work here for a set period of time during, the agricultural production period. Um, and these programs were destabilized when there were bans on cross-border transportation. So it led to a shortage of workers. It also led to a shortage of truck drivers transporting the food from the farm to the processing plants, from the processing plants to food outlets and stores. The processing plants themselves faced shortage of labor. They also had to deal with high risk of infection, right? Because you're in a closed environment, working close together with a lot of people. And that is perfect grounds for, a COVID outbreak. And we saw many examples of that here in Canada. So for example, meat processing plants. So these are giant plants where, the animals from the farms are brought to processed, and the meat is cut up and distributed to all the places that will sell that meat, whether it's grocery stores or restaurants or butcher shops, whatever. And more of our food system in Canada and the United States have seen the meat processing being focused into the hands of fewer and fewer corporations, right? So before, there would have been thousands of meat processing plants, because these would be small places just distributed across the country that would process small amounts of meat. And now with the growth of these multinational corporations in the meat packing industry, what it means is that they can buy out all these little places, right? And create one giant factory. So the result of that is that in the United States and in Canada, there's only a handful of meat processing plants that can then produce all of the meat for the whole country. So it seems very efficient. You can, concentrate everything in one place. But then when something like a COVID epidemic happens and you have an outbreak in one of these meat processing factories, you shut one of these places down, then the whole chain is affected, and it means we may have shortages in the stores, in the restaurants. So this then affects the price of food, obviously, and also the accessibility of that food. And we see that also happening in the farms, with farm workers being affected and farms having to shut down. That's going to affect as well our access to that food. So there's many elements in this chain, right? They're being potentially affected. And also people start panicking. This happened especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Stories circulate, oh, you're going to run out of this, we're going to run out of that. And then everyone panics and everyone buys all of that they find, right? To store at home. This, for some reason, toilet paper was a big item at the beginning. I don't know if anyone remembers this. And if it certainly happened here in Toronto, that you go to the grocery store and you could not find toilet paper. It was a mystery. And grocery stores are not equipped necessarily. They keep the shelves stocked of only as much as they think they're going to sell that day or the day after, right? They're restocking on a daily basis because they don't have large storage areas where they can keep all the product. And they have a very fine-tuned way of organizing this. But when people behave in a non-predictable way, then that's when you get, empty shelves. Also, if anything interrupts the flow of goods on a daily basis, you're going to get empty shelves as well. Um, so that's certainly a consequence of this whole COVID-19 pandemic. Now, did things change then? Well, it certainly caused a lot of players within the system to rethink some of their practices, right? Farms have to think a little bit more about how they accommodate workers, or how do they treat those workers, because the farms that had a better system gave the workers enough space to live in, to sleep in. They did not have um, COVID-19 outbreaks. And then they didn't have to shut down at any point. Their business was able to keep going. And farms that were particularly bad found themselves in a situation where they had to shut down. So there was a very direct economic impact to them. Also, consumers changed their habits, right? People were worried about going to the grocery store, or maybe they couldn't find the products that they needed. So we start seeing more online shopping for food, delivery systems, right? But also the growth of what we call community supported agriculture, CSA. And what the CSA is a way for farmers to sell their products directly to the consumers through a process where you subscribe to the farm's products at the beginning of the season. Right, they'll sell these memberships. So you buy a membership, which means you get every week a box of whatever's growing at that time of year. And it's a very good way for the farm to be able to pre-sell what they're going to produce, because one of the big challenges for especially small family farms is how to sell their products, because they only have a short window of time before everything goes bad. Right, once you pick those tomatoes, they're not going to sit around staying good for more than 5 days. So you need to sell them. So if you can pre-sell them, that's a great advantage. And because people then found the convenience of getting food delivered to them, they start supporting some of these businesses more and more and more. Once one food box like this that exists here in Toronto that I subscribe to, they saw their demand increase by 800% once COVID-19 hit. And they were able to hire more drivers, hire more people to process the boxes, get more farmers involved to make their boxes. But the same is happening across the world. There's a CSA in Beijing, for example, that saw their sales go up 300 to 400% in early 2020. So that's certainly having an impact on the local food economy, right? Now, we don't know what's going to happen once things go back to normal. How many of these new customers of these CSAs are going to stay on next year, the year after? Certainly, there's a lot of people who never thought of ordering their grocery delivered that now do it every week and find it very convenient and want to stay that way. So there's, we can talk a lot about, there's many other elements connected to this too, but we are quickly running out of time. So I just wanted to highlight here that this history of any pandemic is really the history of human connections and movement, right? And this is what globalization is really about as well, right? That it's a history of these global connections. So these things go hand in hand. This a global pandemic and globalization, they have to be connected in many ways. Now the question is, does a global pandemic means the end of globalization? So that's a question that's worth thinking about and worth exploring in more detail. Certainly in terms of food, people are starting to worry if we depend on food that is from other parts of the world and things get disrupted, that means we don't have access to them. So maybe we should grow more of our own food at home. Now I want to finish with just a few words on transitioning then. So to go back to some of those questions that you had, right? You all talked about missing the points of the lecture, of taking notes, of I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute because it's a little easier to see you, quote unquote. You know, finding the right answer, finding what the point is. And I won't lie to you, I remember those first lectures that I attended in first year. And especially those of us coming with maybe English as a second, third, fourth language. That was also my experience. I'm not originally from Canada. My mother tongue is not English. And I remember sitting in that first classroom to this lecture in English on a topic that I was interested in and freezing. Then the professor was very clear. I could understand everything he was saying. But then I realized suddenly that I didn't know how to write notes in English. I had been writing notes in Portuguese my whole life, and I didn't know how to abbreviate things. I didn't have a shorthand for English, and I just didn't think about it. So I had to kind of make it up as I went along. But I had that moment of freezing because I was afraid of making up abbreviations and not being able to understand them later. So it's not a process. I mean, for me, what I ended up doing is what helps a lot is you're going to find all your professors who certainly do this, may assign some reading for you to do before lecture, or you know the topics, right? Maybe you have a textbook. It's good to kind of preview a little bit of the material before you go in, especially things you're unfamiliar with, because then you kind of know already what to expect in terms of the content. That will help you focus your notes, but it also help you to know, okay, I already have information about that in my textbook. So maybe I don't have to write every detail about that. I can just put a note, you know, she's giving definitions on globalization. Or in some cases, in my case, I give the slides of the lecture ahead of time. So don't copy these definitions, right? It's a waste of time. You already have it on the slides. So maybe write notes about, you know, she's giving a lot of different definitions. They seem to be a little bit different depending on the type of author. They can write notes like that to yourself, just to remind yourself that there was this point that was made. But I think the important thing to do is after a couple of days, go back to your notes and see if they make any sense. Because everything makes sense at the moment, but the minute you need to study from them, they stop making sense. And you're going to need your friends. I don't know about what Laura's experience was, but often you get some points, but not all of the points, right? The professor says there's 4, I don't know, reasons, whatever. And then you start writing down and you get 1 and 2, and then you don't get 3. What was 4 again? Because you're still in 2. Maybe someone got 3, but didn't get 2. And so together you can put it, you know, figure out all the 4. So making friends is going to be important to survive in a lot of your classes. But also keep in mind that your experience is going to vary from class to class. They're all not all going to be the same. U of T is a big place. There's people from everywhere, including your professors. You're going to have professors that are going to be very easy to understand. You're going to have professors that are going to be harder to understand. You're going to get people with different accents, maybe accents that you're unfamiliar with. I had a professor that had a very, very thick German accent. tell you, those classes I had to really pay attention. As soon as my mind wandered, I had no idea where we were anymore. Um, and so I really needed my friends to help me piece it all together. It didn't help that the topic of the class was also complicated, um, but we made it through with the help of the textbook, with maybe talking to the prof after class to clarify some questions. The key thing is never to try to just do everything by yourself, I guess, that you're part of a community. Other people are struggling, and we're there to kind of help where we can. Try to find yourself into a small program might help as well. And this is where my plug for New One or other similar programs come in. Because in first year, most of the classes are fairly large, right? So it's easy to feel lost. It's easy for things to move very fast. But all of the colleges offer small classes for first year students in what they call like college ones, right? So there's Trin one, New one, Woodsworth one, like all of them have it. It doesn't mean that if you are at Woodsworth, you have to do Woodsworth one. It just means they exist at Woodsworth, they exist in all the colleges, but they accept students from all across the university. It's just different types of courses are available in the different programs. So I encourage you to look up the College One programs. There are lists on the Faculty of Arts and Science website. Each of the colleges will have their own website as well. I can post for you a very quick and dirty link for ours. Let me just do that. There's things we still need to update on the site, but the course list for next year are there. Oops, sorry, that's wrong. Ignore. Oh, it's correcting my U of T.me. It keeps exchanging it to soft. So you can copy this link. Let me put the HTTP because it's erasing it. That's the shorthand for this. And I also should post here. If folks need questions. Now, is there a specific question or comment or anything that you want us to talk about, whether it's myself? I mean, Laura is a student. She's, you graduated now, right, Laura? Yes. So she's gone through the whole process. She's at the other end. She's reached that end, survived it all really well. And so she can also share maybe some of her perspective. Office hours, excellent question. This is one that often people miss. Basically, all your professors are going to have office hours in their syllabus somewhere. And what office hours means is the time that we set aside where we're available for you. Okay? So you have any question about anything related to the course, sometimes even if they're not. This is a time where you don't have to book an appointment. You don't have to email your professor ahead of time. You just show up at their office, whatever they specify at that time, you can show up. And usually we're just sitting there, bored because people don't show up, waiting for you. So show up in your professor's office hours or your TA's office hours. You're not interrupting anyone's work. This is the time we set aside so we can be available to you without an appointment. Tutorials, it depends on the course and discipline. So for example, in history courses that I teach, tutorials are usually for discussing readings they're assigned and also going over assignment instructions. In other courses, there may be, let's say in math, they may be working out, practicing different kinds of problems that were, taught in class. So basically, the tutorial is a time where, the class is going to be smaller, you're going to be in a smaller group, and you have a TA that can help you through whatever aspect of the course material that it is. So you want to make sure you attend your tutorials, especially because in most cases, there is a participation mark for tutorials. So pay attention to that. It's easily to miss because maybe you can't wake up at the time of tutorial, or maybe you're busy or whatever, and you miss going to those tutorials. But in some courses, they can be 20% of your mark just to be there. So if something happens, you can't make it to tutorial, connect to your TA right away. Maybe there's something they can do to accommodate you. I've had a student once when I was a TA who never showed up for the first 5 weeks of classes, didn't show up to tutorial. This class only had 9 tutorials in total. He had missed 5. By the 5th one, then he came to talk to me because he couldn't wake up at the time of tutorial. He tried, every week he failed. I was like, well, I can move you to a tutorial in the afternoon because I taught other ones. You can come in the afternoon. Oh, can I? Yes. So just come. So he started being able to come, but he only made it to 4 out of the 9, right? So his mark in tutorial was pretty low. So this is a student who got A's in all his paper, but he ended up with a B just because of that. He could have ended up with an A in the course. If he just had talked to me in the first week of classes, that he needed to switch. So pay attention to that. Reach out to your TAs whenever possible. Anything else that you want to, or you're curious about? Were there questions you had at your end, Laura, that you feel we should go over?
Yeah. Oh, I just see one in the chat.
Oh, right.
I can go
recorded lecture. Not really. In terms of or having recorded lectures or making them available, that's really to the discretion of the course instructor. Because it's difficult to have a university policy on it, because we need to be sensitive to the fact that sometimes many courses deal with very sensitive subjects, where perhaps recording the class might not be, advisable, or may make the people in the class uncomfortable, or there may be a number of reasons why recording might not work. In other classes, it's like no big deal, right? And I've recorded my lectures for 10 years now, even before COVID. But some classes where there's a lot of discussion, it doesn't quite work, because then you can't really understand what's going on, because if it's just recording separate voices and an ongoing conversation, it doesn't really make sense. So it really varies from class to class. But what I can say is that last year, since we're all teaching online, there's much more availability of recorded lectures, right? And if not, then there was some kind of accommodation that could be made. What's going to happen this coming year is a little unclear yet. We're still expecting to be back in the classroom, but we're also planning to have some kind of phased in period in the first couple weeks, because not everyone might be able to be in the classroom yet. We don't know if there are going to be travel restrictions or quarantines or things like that. So we're prepared to, even if people arrive at the beginning of the academic year, maybe they have to quarantine for 2 weeks, or maybe they have to have, a vaccine and wait 2 weeks. So there will be some kind of transition period in the first month. We'll probably know in more detail later in the summer, but that's definitely been already communicated to us to think about having some kind of accommodation for those first 2 weeks. And in some classes, it may be the class is going to be online, or maybe they will record the lectures and make it available. There'll be some kind of system like that. The one thing I'll say that'll help you in the first week or two, since a lot of my first year students have problem with this, is, well, you all received your admission letters and all that, right? Check the information about getting your uter ID set up right away. Some people wait until the first week of classes to figure that out, and then they get appointments for 2-3 weeks later. That can really make your life difficult because there's a lot of systems that you can't access without your uter ID. So if it can be done online now, before you even get here, do it. I'm not sure what the system is, but you probably got information about it, how to turn your join ID into a uter ID. Do that now. Okay, because otherwise you're going to be trying to log into the course websites and things and finding it doesn't work. And there's a timetable there, delivery methods. Yeah, so this is as of now. We expect some updates at the end of July in terms of what the public health system is like. Right now, we're optimistic. Course enrollment, I know there's a date where you're going to be told to log in and to choose your courses. So you want to be attentive to that and log in those days to choose your courses. If you have questions about which courses to choose and what to do, contact your college registrar. So if this is a new college, contact the new college registrar. They'll probably have sessions, information sessions. They have drop-in hours as well each week. They can help you make choices. Is Arrive Ready an absolute must? What do you think, Laura? Might be helpful tips.
Yeah, I'd say nothing is an absolute must in the summer, like summer programs, but I think, yeah, like soaking up as much information as you can from the different programs that are offered, or yeah, they're all really great. So,
and it might pace out the information that you get, because also imagine that first week, especially if you attend orientation events, you're going to be flooded with information, right? So a lot of it is not going to stick because there's so much stuff. So if you're now, less busy and you can attend the odd little workshop like this, then you can be dealing with one little chunk of information at a time. So I think that would definitely help instead of concentrating everything into those 3 days of orientation because it is quite overwhelming. I am not sure about Flick. I don't know if Laura can give any advice on that.
Yeah, on what basis are students applying for Flicks selected on? So I believe like it just depends on like every year, like just like how many students apply. It is really popular, but I think like if you submitted that application on time, I don't imagine that you'll have any issues. As like a Flick mentor myself, it's really based on like the program that you're in and the courses that you'll be taking. And Flick actually will put you into the same sort of core courses as your Flick. So if you're in social sciences, for instance, you may be enrolled in like Sociology 100 and Paul 101 all together, and you'll also be enrolled in those same tutorials with those same students. And to Kayla's question, Flicks are not mandatory, though I highly recommend it. It's a really good way to kind of like kind of going back to that point of like finding those smaller communities. It's a really great way
And
to.
make friends and social. And it's not a course. It's not like you're going to be graded or, have extra homework and things like that. But it's a way to have activities and things with a smaller group of people that are kind of have similar interests.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you want to try to find those opportunities in your first year, because you think, okay, maybe I'll just sit in, it's study and study and study, and that's great. But what's really going to make a difference for you is to get yourself out there and start creating your own community. And that could be Flick, that could be joining a club, that could be finding something that you're interested in and joining a group that does that. um, Highly recommend that, because that's going to make a big difference. If you can find a your community inside of this large community, that will affect how your experience at university is going to go. It's a good question about course conflict. Obviously, you can only take courses when they're available, right? And some of the core courses that are mandatory, they tend to be very large. They tend to have multiple sections because they are also thinking about that. If you're in doubt, since this is first year and you haven't chosen your majors and minors yet, consult with your college registrar. If you feel that it's going to be happening to you, they're better equipped to advise you, if you have an appointment with an advisor, on what paths you can take that will keep options open for you. Okay, because they know, okay, are you interested in X, Y, and Z? Okay, this is what you can do to overcome this or that. They know very well the different programs and how they work.
Yeah. And in regard to Flick specifically, I do know that like they are pretty flexible when it comes, like they understand that these conflicts can come up. So if you get in touch with those as well, like you won't be kicked out of Flick if for some reason you can't take all, 4 courses that they put you in. Um, Nothing to worry about with that.
I don't know if there are group sessions per se. I mean, they do hold workshops and things for various programs, especially as you're going to find towards the term, selecting what do they call them? Your posts, right? But you can definitely make appointments to meet with someone one-on-one. Right now, during the term, you can reach out, and there's drop-in hours as well. I mean, the drop-in hours, obviously the time is limited, but then if you feel you have one particular question you need help with, you can drop in. But if you want to talk a little bit more general advice on your program and all that, maybe it's a good idea to reach out to make an appointment with an advisor. And then the registrar's office can also connect you with other kinds of support, like if you're working and you are going to school full time and you're overwhelmed, they can help you get an appointment with the learning strategist that can help you figure out how to get through successfully, whether it's for your study habits or whether it's through time management, like all kinds of issues related to learning. They can help with that. So it's not just choosing courses, but even just navigating your courses. There are folks that can prepare you for that.
If it's okay, I actually just wanted to address sort of one question that we had that I thought was pretty important. Some students asked about accessibility services and like what is offered from them. Just so everyone knows, I have the date here. Let me just pull it up. If you do think that you're someone that does need accessibility services, there is a deadline to register with them, and that's on July 14th. So it's coming up at 5 p.m. There's like sort of like a sort of package that you'll have to fill out. Um,
Hmm.
and in regard to services, it really just depends on you and your unique needs, but they are really great and they are here to support you in different ways. So that's getting accommodations for your assignments, maybe getting more time to complete your assignments. um, but yeah, I just wanted to note that.
There's a link that I'm posting right there. And it's right on the top. It says register by July 14th. And if you don't know if you're someone that might need accommodations, you've never been sort of maybe properly diagnosed with something, but you always, struggled a little bit, register and have them assess you. And these are things that it's probably best to do now, right? Well, there's time.
And then I guess I just see one more question. So, is the transition from being a high school student to becoming a university student really big?
That's a big question. um, it can be, right? Because as I mentioned, I also helped with some of the transition workshops during orientation week. And one of the things I talked about is this difference in terms of assumptions and perspectives, right? That we have. One is related here in terms of there's assumptions about critical thinking is very valued at the university. As it can be that it's not to say that you don't do critical thinking in high school, but there's a different emphasis on maybe in high school you're trying to ensure students learn a certain content, and then as long as you can demonstrate that you learned that content is fine. At the university, that can be a big gap because if you just show you've learned the content, that could be a C, because that's what the C means. You are succeeding. You did what was asked of you. What A and a B mean is that you were able to think critically about that content. So that can be a big kind of shift and in mindset. So this is where the transition can be a little tricky for a lot of folks. And what critical thinking means is really asking questions, is really not just stopping at the first wall. It's like, you're told something, you ask why, how, when, we look at those definitions of globalization. Okay, why is this person defining globalization this way? Who are they? What is this about? And then you start looking at, who these authors are, what their biases are. Then you can explain why they got to that answer. And then you can talk about that. You can make it into a problem. That's applying critical thinking. So that is something that you need to kind of work on as you go along, but that certainly make a big difference. So when you're not used to doing that, and it is hard if you haven't been questioning things all along, then that transition can be a little bit more difficult. Because you've like, but I'm giving the definitions, I'm saying all the things, why am I getting C's? It can be very frustrating. So my suggestion is that you talk a lot to your TAs, to your professors, because they are going to be asking you those questions, and they're going to be pushing you. And then you're going to get a better sense of the things that you're expected to do. So that will make your transition easier, because if you do that, then you're going to be less surprised by what you find. Because we'll certainly tell you, there's no secret. Students come to talk to me about, what to expect in this assignment. I'll tell you exactly. I'll give you examples. I'm dying for people to know what they need to do. So don't stop at that assignment sheet. If seems confusing to you, if it's unclear still, if the instructions don't, make it clear for you, ask questions. And for some people, it might not be that huge of a transition, depending on the nature of, the programs they were in. So it really depends. But what I will say is that if you find it difficult, don't assume that you're the only one finding it difficult. Probably most of you are finding it difficult. Okay. And that is normal. And don't feel bad if you have to go see your professor in office hours and ask questions. Okay, I'm asked for top tips, academic and non-academic, for incoming first-year students. How to? I think a lot of the things I think it sounds redundant and obvious, but the thing that really helped me the most was not being shy about knocking on people's doors and asking questions. I give this example of my friend and I, well, we didn't go to school together, became friends later on. But so my best friend and I, we both went and studied history and all that. But we had very different experiences in first year because she came in from a Canadian school. She was a really good student. She was very confident in her writing and reading abilities, right? And she was taking a class in history, which is all reading and writing. So she's very confident. So, she wrote her first essay, submitted it, and ended up with an F, which was a big shock. And it had to do with the fact that she didn't use citations. She didn't know she had to. It was a different system, different thing. Anyways, that was a big shock for her. Now, I came in, and because I was coming from a different country and I was writing in a different language, I assumed everything was different and I didn't know how to do things. So I spent forever knocking on my professor's doors, my TA's doors, went to every office hour to ask every question, okay, I got the assignment instructions. This is what I'm thinking of doing. This is what I'm thinking of writing. Is this okay? Can you look at my draft? Because I was very anxious that I was, not going to do well because of language differences, because of different academic background. And then I ended up doing very well because a lot of the problems that I would have if I had just written the assignment and submitted were caught before I submitted them through these conversations, through, asking my TAs to look at my drafts and things like that. So it's not that I'm any smarter than my friend. I'm not. But it was those asking of clarifications and questions that really helped me. So don't assume anything, check on things. And we're not going to be offended if you ask us to clarify things. Okay, so if you don't want to ask in class because it's a big class, go to those office hours, send an email. Just don't do it the day the assignment is due, because then we can't help you. You may not even get an answer. So that would be my top tip in terms of academic things. And non-academic things, it's really to try to find some kind of activity outside academics that you enjoy. Okay, that'll help you with stress, with just balancing life and work. Whether it's exercising, whether it's art, whether it's whatever. There's so many clubs. You want to learn photography, there's a photography club. You want to, I don't know, do art, there are art clubs, there is music things, whatever you're interested in, join something. um, that made a big difference for me too, to be able to be successful at university, was when I joined things outside of class that that really helped. Seems counterproductive because you think you're wasting time that you should be studying, but your studying is going to be much better if your life is more balanced. That's all I'll say about that. Thanks for the question. We went way over perhaps, but I don't know. I didn't want to rush too much. So hopefully that was okay. How did you feel? If you had been in class and um, you have to adapt your style. And this is the other thing. If you're struggling with note taking, the learning strategists can also help you with that. Give you tips. The Success Center runs workshops as well. I remember going to some of those as an undergrad on, how to write notes, how to, all kinds of different, how to manage your time. And there's always good tips. Or you can just search online. All these things have whole tip sheets on. And there's no one method fits all. It really depends on each person's style. You can be recording things in class. Now that's the other thing. You might want to ask if you can record things in class, but even if lectures are recorded, you want to still take notes, because a very big mistake is to not take any notes because you have recordings. But then when you get to the end of the year and you have to study for exams, you don't have the time to re-listen to every lecture again. So you do need to have some notes that you can just refer to.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any more questions, but thank you so much to everyone for attending this session. If you don't mind holding on for just another second, I'm just going to drop a link in the chat. It's just a feedback survey for you all to sort of leave your thoughts on this session and any other sessions that you've attended during this summer welcome. Don't forget that there's like more sessions coming up. We have a session about residence life. So if you're moving on campus this fall and living in new college, that session will be really helpful for you, as well as other academic support sessions are coming up. We also Ask an Advisor is running from the registrar's office right now every Tuesday and Thursday. You can find all of this information on Quarkus. You've also been added to your head peer leader groups through e-mentorship, so you can email them as well with any other questions that you may have. But here is the link. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Well, thank you, and welcome, and hopefully this helps somewhat with your transition into the first term. De nada.